Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. We're really excited that you have chosen to spend some time with us today. I am Lisa Birdie. I'm the Director of Policy and Research at the Financial Health Network, and I'm really honored to moderate today's discussion. Thank you so much to the Center for Financial Inclusion for providing the space for this conversation, which really couldn't be more timely given the climate events we've seen recently, both around the US, where our panelists are all based today, and around the world. For those of you who are tuning in and might not be familiar, the Financial Health Network is a nonprofit organization. We're based in Chicago in the United States. For about 2 decades, we've been working with financial services leaders, employers, policymakers, and innovators to research and design solutions that advance financial health for all people, and especially those most vulnerable among us. Today's discussion is going to focus around how community leaders, community lenders, and nonprofits are stepping up to promote financial health in the face of increasing impacts of climate change. And as we sort of go through this conversation, I encourage you all, please engage with us in the chat. Please engage with each other in the chat. But really reflect on how sort of climate-related events in your lives are impacting your communities, families, small businesses, and especially those who are most vulnerable in our communities. So I'm going to dive in and introduce today's panelists. We are waiting on one other person to join us, and we're excited for that as well. But let's start with those, the two who are on the call right now. Casey Bell is the Chief Impact Officer at Pacific Community Ventures, where she helms the Good Jobs Innovation Lab. She leads the organization's Good and Green Jobs strategy, and she focuses her team's social impact investment on small businesses. We're really pleased to have Casey here today and the expertise that she brings. Michelle Jones is the Chief External Affairs Officer at Money Management International, which is a leader in consumer financial health. One of the services that MMI offers that I think is particularly relevant to our conversation today is post-disaster financial recovery counseling and personalized assistance for disaster survivors through Project Porchlight. We'll also have Sarita Turner join us. I'll sort of read her bio now, and she can also introduce herself when she joins. She's the Chief External Affairs Officer at Elevate and is bringing some community development expertise to our conversation today. She leads the organization's innovation, fundraising, and policy engagements. So we're excited to have her as well when she's able to join. All right, I would love to start off today by sort of defining financial health. This is something that Financial Health Network focuses on, and something that we've spent a lot of time thinking about. Like, what does it mean to actually be financially healthy? Sarita, thanks for joining us. I just provided your introduction as well. We're thrilled you can be here. We're going to start off by just sort of talking about what we mean by financial health. And it's really about people's ability to manage their day-to-day finances. We think about the ways in which people are spending and saving and borrowing and planning for the future in ways that they can be resilient in the face of unexpected expenses, and have confidence for sort of that long-term perspective. This is a really universal concept, but I think that it plays out very differently from community to community. And I think that it is something that is highly impacted by our changing climate. And so actually that's where I want to start today. Sarita, I actually would love to start with you. Your work at Elevate focuses on empowering vulnerable communities, many of whom are on the front lines of climate change. Many of these folks are people of color. Many of these households have low incomes and might have constrained financial resources. I want to be sure that Sarita can hop back on our call right here. Give us just 1 second. Okay, I think she dropped. We can come back to her. And I actually think that either Casey or Michelle can jump in here as well, which is, I think the question that would love for us to spend a little bit of time with is really just how do we better understand this intersection between financial health and climate change? What are some of the ways that you all see this intersect? And from your vantage point, how do these two topics fit together?
To jump in and start and just say thanks to everybody who is joining us today. I think, from the context of the United States, we're facing two massive systemic challenges at this moment. One is the existential and wellness threats that are just part and parcel of the climate crisis, and the other are like the social and democratic risks that kind of come from having continually widening racial and gender wealth gaps. And so I think the nexus of addressing climate change and targeting greenhouse gas emissions reductions is also ensuring that the financial opportunities that are going to be presented, just on the basis of trying to solve this crisis, are recognized equitably, and that the communities that are most adversely impacted, frontline communities, have the knowledge, skills, resources, and access to capital that really allows them to be full participants in designing and developing the solutions that are going to serve them best.
That's hugely helpful. Sarita, I'm curious if you could jump in from your perspective at Elevate, how you're sort of seeing the connection between financial health and climate risks.
Yeah, and I don't know, the technology wizards are not in my corner this morning, so I apologize for all the challenges getting on. But, and this is building a little bit off of Casey's response. The same systems of extraction and oppression, that redlining, historical challenges with land use are the same systems that now climate change is causing economic oppression and broadening racial wealth gaps around, right? So our approach about dismantling those systems and ensuring access to resources and opportunity is critical, because we have, right, the impacts of redlining, the lack of investment in resilient infrastructure, the lack of investment in transit that connects to job centers, and the credit system, the insurance system. All these things work against Black and Brown communities that have been steered to and contained in these types of situations. And so we have to continue to resolve those systemic challenges, because the impacts of climate change are pushing people right through those same systems, but at the same time build opportunities like the Justice 40 Accelerator that Elevate in partnership with the Partnership for Southern Equity and the Solutions Project runs. That is a accelerator that ensures that community-based organizations can participate in these federal resources, access them, gives them a grant to participate in training, and gives them gap funds, a revolving loan fund to have access to when they need matching funds. But we need that same kind of approach for small businesses and entrepreneurs to tap into the economic opportunities that are coming down from the federal government and that are abounding because of climate interventions, and then also continue to work on these systemic issues.
And if I think that's a really on to what both Casey and Sarita had to share here, one of the things I love about this panel is the diversity of vantage points in our organizations and the work that we do. And Lisa, you were asking about, where can we most clearly see the impact of financial health and climate change? And interestingly, in our organization, we're serving people across the nation. And when you look at our penetration into different communities, what you see is it matches the populations of the US, which means by default, We're doing a lot of work on the West Coast in California, where you have a lot of wildfire impact, and we're doing a lot of work in Florida, and where you've seen a lot of, you know, hurricane impact, and so on and so forth, right? And our work in this space came about very organically because we were providing counseling to people who time and again would come to us and say, the problem is I'm behind on my credit cards, or the problem is I'm having trouble keeping up with my housing payments, or the problem is so on and so forth, right? And when we were having the conversation, what we came to realize was those problems were happening today because they had survived a natural disaster and had done everything they could to rebuild their lives, to rehabilitate their finances, and to move forward. But they were left with this incredible drag on their financial well-being as a result of the disaster. And that's when we knew that we needed to turn our attention upstream and get closer to the disaster through Project Porchlight to help people work their way through that very long and difficult process of financial recovery after disaster.
I think that's such a good point. I think in particular, you know, I think there's such clear ramifications, financial ramifications for folks who are experiencing sort of these large scale events, these weather events. And I also think that, you know, we see additionally, you know, impacts of some of the more chronic stressors that are precipitated by a changing climate. And I think that both of these are really weighing on the pocketbooks of folks. And so just really appreciate you elevating that, Michelle, and Casey and Sarita for talking about some of the ways that you all are sort of engaging in that conversation. You know, I think community lenders are really interesting actors here, especially in the wake of crises. You know, I think that there are often governmental responses, but I also think that it's really the work of what's happening on the ground and some of those organizations that are embedded within community that are directly responding to the financial needs of folks in the wake of some of these both chronic stressors, but also these sort of large scale disasters. And so, Casey, I want to turn to you for a second. You know, from your work, how do you see community lending evolving to meet some of the financial needs created by these climate disasters?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to play a critical role. And I'm excited to lift up a conversation that we had among the panelists, like prior to coming into this call, about a study out of Rice University that shows in the US, in counties where FEMA disaster relief is applied and deployed after a disaster, there is evidence that shows that the Black-white wealth gap gets worse in these communities because those with assets are in a position to harness the relief and continue to build wealth from it, whereas communities of color, you know, get left behind and often face like physical and other, you know, systems barriers to actually accessing that relief. And CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions, community lenders in the United States, were born out of the civil rights movement to address market failures. We know as lenders that we cannot, as Bulbul Gupta, our CEO, says, we cannot address market failures with completely market-driven solutions. So we have had to really sort of center the voices of our community in the design and development of our responses to climate change impacts and climate economy opportunities. We have a local level set of advisors, contractor developers, electricians that we have been talking about, you know, sort of in our climate economy programmatic response. You know, with $27 billion coming out of the U.S. federal government in the form of greenhouse gas reduction funds, you know, we know that there are going to be wealth building opportunities. But about 10 years ago, there was another infrastructure opportunity in the U.S., the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and 98% of the of infrastructure and climate economy businesses within the U.S. that are like necessary to the transition, they're small businesses. In the best of years, they face cash flow challenges, particularly between when they book a project and, go to like, for example, repairing a dam, right? Between when they book that project and when they recognize revenue. There are times when they are rotating, that gap on credit cards. And so plugging in financial solutions that sort of stop these disincentives to growth for these businesses are critical to participation. Our small businesses, we've heard folks have had staffed up for ERA, got really excited about taking more and more apprentices, growing the business. And at the end of the day, those benefits from the program just did not trickle down to them. So in our design of what we're calling our Climate Justice Mobilization Fund, we are focused on getting restorative working capital to businesses that are traditionally denied by banks because of the cash flows that they have and the credit histories that they have. I think one thing that has been like sort of critically important in our design is just recognizing that small businesses in the U.S. Globally have been through, a pandemic where there were widespread shutdowns, supply chain disruption, inflation, and so I think when you're used to hearing no, you're not necessarily used to being able to like. You wouldn't necessarily be looking for capital. So, for us, like we are trying to like really keep the community and community lender by not only designing products that are like specifically affordable and designed to meet the cash flow needs of these businesses, but to partner deeply so that our origination strategy is rooted in the trusted organizations that these businesses interact with on a day-to-day to refer to us. And to show up as less of a bank and more of a partner in supporting their financial health through wraparound services.
One of the things that strikes me in your response, Casey, is just the importance of sort of embedded institutions and how important like that direct connection with customers, be that small businesses or sort of thinking through individuals, supporting individuals or families, like how critical and how important that is. I'd love for us to spend a little bit of time sort of talking about some upstream interventions as well. I think that there's a lot of attention sort of paid, rightfully so, in the wake of large scale disasters. What are the responses and what does recovery look like? But I also think that it's important to have this conversation around what can happen sort of ahead of some of these impacts as well. And so just sort of thinking through what are some of these upstream opportunities to mitigate climate impacts on financial health. Michelle, you often are working with folks after they've already experienced this, but if you could sort of help folks wave a magic wand and say, this is actually what I need to be financially prepared for these increasing events. What are some of the things that you might include in someone's financial preparedness toolkit?
Yeah. So, fortunately, Lisa, over really, I would say the past year or so, we have started getting traction and with people like FEMA and in conversations with American Red Cross on the importance of increasing financial health in advance of a disaster. And that can be incredibly helpful to people. I would say that financial wellness is absolutely a preparedness tool. So after a disaster, two of the most helpful things to you, one is having credit. So having a credit card where your available credit is higher than your current balance, incredibly helpful. The other thing is ability to access capital, meaning your credit score and your overall debt load are not going to disqualify you from available loans that may help you post-disaster with what your needs may be. So having those two things are incredibly helpful. But if you're not there today, that's something that you can absolutely address and improve upon before disaster strikes. And that's where a nonprofit credit counseling organization can help you get there. They can help you with that financial preparedness in advance of a disaster. You know, savings is always the gold standard, right? If we could have 3 to 6 months of savings, terrific, and have all your gallons of water and all your non-perishable foods, and right, the list can seem a little overwhelming, right? And let's start with how overwhelming 3 to 6 months of savings can be. I mean, we know 50% of consumers have $700 or less. We know 1 out of 4 have $0 in savings available. So one thing we also stress is any amount of savings is helpful. Nobody's ever been sorry that they had $200 available. That $200 is amazingly helpful, even if it's not $2,000, right? The other is if accruing that level of savings at 3 to 6 months just feels too far out of reach, what you can do is improve your access to credit. That is absolutely reasonable and within reach. So that is something we would focus on. The last thing I would say is when you talk about your financial toolkit, there are some really practical, low lift things that people can do as part of their everyday life to help prepare themselves better financially should a disaster strike. One is just put your insurance company's phone numbers in your phone so you have them handy when you need them. The other is when you hear news stories about events happening and you wonder, I wonder if my insurance would cover me in that, call them and ask. The other thing is take pictures of your bills as you pay them. So if you're not doing online bill pay, if you're getting some of your bills in the mail, take pictures of those as you pay them. That way you have all the information you need to communicate with people after a disaster. And then finally, this is super simple and something that kids love to do for you too, is do a videotape of your home. Have somebody walk through your house, walk through every single room, open every drawer, open every closet, record everything in your home. That is invaluable to have in the aftermath of disaster and something that can really save you a lot of heartache.
I think those are, I mean, it's really practical. Like, I think that in some ways the change in climate and the climate crisis can feel overwhelming. And I appreciate that there are some really tangible and tactical steps that can make real impacts in folks' lives when they're faced, I think when they're faced with this, right? Like I think that's part of it too, is like, it's no longer a question of if, but when. You know, Sarita, I know that you all are really thinking as well about what the transition or what adaptations and what mitigation might look like in the face of a changing climate. I'm curious if you want to share, you know, some of the other sort of upstream opportunities that you see that can make really big impacts for folks to manage their livelihoods in the wake of this changing climate.
Yeah, Lisa, thank you for that question. I'm going to shift back to the entrepreneurial approach in the context of the community development strategies, the housing development work that Elevate does. So we run the Justice 40 Accelerator that I talked about. We also run a contractor accelerator. So we're really working hard to ensure that we have Black and Brown led, women led contractors who we can hire, right, to take on some of the transition, electrification work that we're doing in communities to help do some of the cost savings that Michelle talked about, but also really helping to tap into this climate economy opportunity, the federal resources that are coming down the pike, and just the transition in general that Black and Brown businesses are able to get into the game and participate in the game. We feel like those are real, like if we can help people build viable businesses, we run a line of credit program as well. We're continuing to think about all the ways to make that program more suitable for small, undercapitalized businesses that are outside of this network loop, relationship loop, that historically have not been included in the clean and green wave, and how we've kind of, as a American culture, transition through into the transition. How do we make sure that we have businesses that are ready to take advantage of this big influx of resources that is coming out of the federal government, that can partner with corporations that are in transition mode, that they understand the need for transition, they're participating to do their part to transition their services, they need subcontractors. How do we make sure that we have uh, folks from communities that are most impacted by racial wealth gaps and climate change ready to participate in this new economy? Because that is how we're going to make movement on racial wealth gaps, right? Casey talked about, past investments from the federal government and how those have not supported or advanced or dismantled economic barriers and advanced opportunity for those who are suffering racial wealth gaps in this country. So how do we continue to prepare communities, small businesses to take advantage of these opportunities when they come, recognizing they're not taking advantage of them because of some deficit on their part? They're not taking advantage of them because the barriers to get into the game, to get the credit, to get the capital, to get the training, to be able to participate. We did a summit yesterday, just really quickly, and I went to a session. Elevate had a summit. And in our summit, one of the sessions that I participated in when it went to as a participant was called Cyber Equity. And it was all about all the ways that small businesses, one, if they don't have cybersecurity strategies and approaches, and they don't like awareness, they're now being excluded from contracts with major corporations because they're requiring the subs that they work with to have cybersecurity pieces in place. And I'm not a cybersecurity expert, so I'm with the language, but it's just another area where there's now another barrier to participation because you already don't have the capital just to participate. Now you need to be able to build your IT systems and strategies in a way, and you need experts to help you with that. So we're continually looking at what are the barriers and how do we dismantle them, and what are the ways that we can engage contractors in our own work so that we can support their success, but also learn more about what the needs are and how we can better meet them.
I'd love to build on that if that's okay, Lisa, because I think what Sarita is lifting up is critically important. We can't manage financial health and wealth that we don't have, right? And so creating this like access to opportunity, like in confluence with how we design policy that stimulates and supports greenhouse gas, energy transitions, regenerative agriculture, it's very critical. And I think that economic opportunity for the communities that are most historically underserved is not technology agnostic. There are really, material differences. If you broaden beyond the greenhouse gas perspective into the economic opportunity perspective, there are innovations that you can do that are going to reduce emissions, transportation, electrification, solar installation. But how much of that wealth is built and retained within the community? Whereas if you are really doubling down on the built environment, creating better schools, better hospitals, better homes, better multifamily housing, that's building wealth in the form of assets and real estate. And not only are we developing businesses, to be able to achieve those goals. That's really the thrust of what we're doing with the Climate Justice Mobilization Fund, construction, engineering, manufacturing, general contracting, energy efficiency installation, HVACs, all of those things. Buildings need them. And again, from that perspective of restoration and regeneration, I think it's critically important to broaden that lens. Not only do we want to see projects done in historically underestimated communities as Justice 40 mandates, but we want to make sure there's not a divergence between, what we all net benefit from in terms of GHG emissions reductions and exacerbation of wealth gaps for those that are poised to take advantage of this historic opportunity.
One thing that comes sort of clearly to me actually across all three of your responses there is really how there's this opportunity to really think about, how do we set individuals, households, communities, businesses up for success, up to be able to take advantage of these transitions into new technologies, into new industries even. How do we set up folks to be able to really weather the impacts, and not only weather the impacts, but actually to build wealth as part of that process? Casey, I actually would love to come back to you with a question, which is, I think that these challenges are often very universal, but as we've talked about, a lot of the solutions are rooted in deep inequities that are often place-based. And I know that you all are thinking about sort of the place-based nature of some of these barriers, but also opportunities. And I'm wondering if you can talk to us about your work in California, and sort of provide us with some examples of ways that that place has been important, has impacted sort of these barriers and opportunities, and the work that you're doing to address them.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. Before PCV launched its climate strategy, we were deeply focused on executing a strategy around, place-based innovation and understanding the role of restorative capital, community co-creation, and blended finance in our ability to serve historically underrepresented communities. And what's unique, I think, about PCV is through our intentionality theory of change, 92% of our capital is going to entrepreneurs of color and women. When we launched one of our place-based funds, the Oakland Restorative Loan Fund, the first round of that investment was in 2021. We were just starting to hear about the Omicron variant on our news sets. Our businesses had started to reopen. They were starting to close again. And in the US, the Paycheck Protection Program, the federal stimulus program that was supporting small businesses, was poised to sunset. We received an anchor investment from UCSF at 1%. Through having unrestricted grants, we were able to blend that down to 0%. But we knew that given the communities that we were trying to serve for various different reasons, and it differed, sort of based on the demographics, that if we're about to send out an email that we have a loan product that's 0%, zero fee, people are going to look at that and they're going to say, well, that is spam. And so, I think we think about the blended finance and the structuring as one pillar of the Oakland Restorative Loan Fund. But there's two other pillars that allowed us to achieve place-based impact in a very deep and impactful way. One of those was community co-creation. We went really deep with the Oakland Black Business Fund, with the Oakland Chinatown Chamber of Commerce, with the Unity Council, Spanish speaking, to really understand where their small businesses, kind of were coming out of this pandemic, and to co-create, how we were showing up and sharing information about the fund, so that folks would trust that this is a solution that is designed for them. And it would manifest in ways like, okay, making sure that the loan application is in multiple, Spanish, Cantonese, Vietnamese, Tagalog, the languages that, the languages that are most frequently spoken across these communities. And the second is like really finding our clients where we are. We could take an ad out in the Oakland Tribune, or we could place an ad within, the Oakland Chinatown Circular in Cantonese. It makes a real difference, to know what your folks are reading and what they need. So, we have a playbook on these elements, on the impact management strategy, and just kind of identifying where businesses are. 96% of that capital was deployed within historically redlined communities. Our climate approach is really building off of those learnings. We have a learning agenda along with our fund thesis around, supporting economic opportunity through deep investment in climate-aligned small businesses. And part of that is understanding where those businesses are concentrated, where they're concentrated relative to projects, right? What the makeup of those businesses are from a demographic perspective, who the community, who are the community nodes that are trusted, sort of gathering spaces for these small businesses, who are the folks that are influencing how they evaluate opportunities. And we're working on partnership strategies to be able to go deeper from that perspective, understanding how to work with contractor developers, prime contractors, and positioning our solutions in a way that meet the challenges that are coming directly from the voices of the communities that we serve.
Uh-oh.
I think we lost our moderator.
I think so too. I'm telling you, these IT goblins are out today.
I apologize.
I won't take that personally, Lisa.
I'm back. But yeah, these goblins, I don't know. I feel like maybe there's something around the cybersecurity. Maybe we need to enlist some of your experts from yesterday as well.
Maybe so.
In the conversation. I do think that I heard, almost all of that answer, and I apologize for dropping. And one of the things that really strikes me, Casey, that you're saying is just this need to have a deep understanding of who you're working with. And it really is sort of that community lens and the co-creation. And Michelle, at the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned that it was really through conversations with clients, with folks that you were working with, that led you to this understanding of around this intersection between climate change and financial health and financial wellness. And I'm really curious if you could just talk us a little bit more through some of the work that you're doing to help folks really recover in the wake of experiencing a natural disaster, and how that has been shaped by the conversations and the experiences of clients that you've been working with.
Sure, absolutely. And I think backing up what Casey was just saying, what Sarita has also spoken about around location and community matters, place matters, it absolutely does. Disaster recovery, in our view, is and should remain local. And folks in place to support local recovery should also be able to take advantage of national resources to complement what they have. And that's where we come into play. And what we've seen is that different communities are going to need different things. So we did, some of you may remember the campfire fires in Paradise, California, several years ago now. I think it was 2018, but that was a community that was a town that was completely burned to the ground in a wildfire. It's just devastating. It's terrible. But we were able to do a lot of work there. And I think it shows ways in which an organization like ours can kick in and support the local community as they work to recover. So in Paradise, one of the things that we were able to provide was on-site training for their long-term recovery caseworkers. And long-term recovery caseworkers are typically volunteers from the community who want to help, but may not be experts themselves in recovery. So we were able to help train them on things like the basics of working with disaster affected consumers, how to talk to them, what to expect. Our counselors are trauma informed counselors, and that's really important when you're working with people who've been through a disaster. We talked to them about taking care of themselves as a caseworker, about spotting scams and particularly contractor scams. We talked about common rumors that you might hear and how to help bat those down, and how to talk proactively about the solutions and things that really do work. And then finally, we talked to them about finances and just how to talk with people about money, which people are funny about talking about their money, you know, something you usually keep very private. And we work to overcome some of that stigma and shame that comes with opening up about your finances, and particularly your challenges with finances. So doing some training for those long-term recovery caseworkers was a real meaningful piece we were able to add. Secondly, we were able to act as a support for the recovery center via the financial counseling services that we offer. So they're working with people, and you may have a recovery counselor who has made 8 phone calls and has calling back their client they're working with to say, I found you a couch, right? That is a terrific resource. But then they can also offload some of the consumer's needs onto us in terms of helping to work through FEMA declinations and helping to how to make best use of their insurance proceeds and how to prioritize their existing financial obligations versus the new reality of where they need to put their resources today. So that's another place that we were able to help. And then finally, when you're in a community that's been impacted by a disaster, there can be a wait list for accessing one of those recovery counselors. It's very easy for the demand to outstrip the availability. And so that too is a place where we can serve as a backstop. We have a phone center that operates 24/7. So we can act as a centralized call center. We can field calls from the community. We can help get them back out to local resources as they become available. And we can go ahead and start the financial counseling conversation and piece of the recovery while we are waiting for their long-term recovery counselor and other supports to become available. And that long-term support that is provided through a financial lens. When you think about some of the loans or local grant programs that open up that help with rebuilding, we had a wonderful client who shared her experience over the long haul via Facebook about she rebuilt her home in Paradise. She rebuilt it to be able to withstand another wildfire should one happen. And she talked about what that process was like, what it was like to rehab the land so that it could be built upon again, what it was like to work through accessing different loans and grant products that made that happen. And so helping people understand when those products become available as they go, and also navigating the bureaucracy and the paperwork and the challenge that goes into that is a way that we're able to help those local communities and provide a support to the resources that are there.
I think that's a really poignant example, thinking through the destruction of the campfire and sort of the responses that have come out of that. I want to actually elevate one of the questions that came in through the chat, which is, I think, related here, which is, how would you approach financial health based on location in response to these climate impacts? Like, for example, do you all see differences between the needs, opportunities, barriers in more rural communities versus more urban communities? And how might you think, especially our audience being quite global, like what are other ways in which you see place, geography, and urbanicity sort of intersecting with these topics?
So prior to joining Pacific Community Ventures, I spent 5 years at the Cooperative Finance Corporation supporting rural electric utilities in energy transition and broadband deployment. And I think some of the tenets apply about what we're speaking about, broad opportunity and how it shows up in communities. Broadband infrastructure investment has been a massive focus in the rural electric cooperative space, and democratizing access to the internet. But while while those investments are often touted as bringing a lot of economic opportunity, there's not a lot of evidence that the actual direct benefits of the project are being recognized in communities. In fact, they could be an economic shock because you have talent and firms that are coming in for a couple of years to install a project, bolstering local businesses that are then, moving back. And, I think it is this theme around understanding where the ability to mitigate risk, restore economic viability, and even like from an agricultural perspective, like advance regenerative systems, aligning the workforce capabilities, the small business capacity to be able to address those issues locally. It looks different in a rural community versus an urban one. Every community is unique. But this approach of knowing that the folks closest to the challenge are also the ones that need to be empowered to support the solution, and resourced to support the solution through capital. I think that's a powerful lens to look beyond greenhouse gas emissions and into this broader opportunity mindset.
Yeah, I'd love to just chime in on that question as well. There are differences, but in the context of lack of access, there are so many similarities between the communities that Elevate serves and rural communities. Let me rephrase that: the urban communities that Elevate serves and rural communities. And we do a good amount of work with tribal communities. So just following along the access to broadband piece that Casey brought up, there is a lack of infrastructure access in communities that are more rural. And there is a lack of infrastructure access in communities that are urban, that are low income, and it's a different type of infrastructure access. But when you don't have the hardware or you don't have the money, and some of the internet providers are doing a better job of offering low cost access, and but we still see this huge gap, right, in who has access and who doesn't. And so the work of addressing the lack of access issues is critical. So when most often, not all, that we're not always able to do it, but when we go into communities, we're pairing a policy agenda and policy advocacy with actually doing the technical pieces of the work as well, because we understand that we're there needed to do the technical work, because there's most likely a policy challenge, or even if it's not the policy challenge itself, there's a policy implementation challenge. And so we really understand that the relationship between providing a service and addressing the need to not, addressing the lack of need, right? Trying to dismantle the need for the service in the first place has to go hand in hand, because we need to try to work ourselves out of jobs, right? That really is, and we can find new jobs. We won't be afraid of that. But so we see that there are differences and spatial differences and outreach differences and abilities to reach people. And there are definitely resource differences, but we also see the many ways that there are the same systems, the same lack of access issues, lack of resources issues that are creating the problems in the first place. So we want to always pair policy approach with technical assistance to hopefully solve the problem forever.
Thank you for elevating both of those points. I think that it's very helpful, I think, to think about what are some of the barriers, but also the opportunities, and how there is some commonality in our experience, regardless of sort of where we're located. I would love to have a conversation sort of in our last time around what innovation in this space can look like. And where you all see sort of opportunities to push forward. At Financial Health Network, we've been an organization for 20 years, really thinking about how do we build financial health for all. We want to continue that for the next 20 years and beyond. And we're really trying to think through, what are the opportunities? What are these frontiers that we can really explore? And so curious for you all to sort of bring in your expertise to this. What are some of these opportunities for innovation? What are ways that we can, build a more equitable, climate responsive, and financially healthy community? I'll let anyone jump in initially, and I think that we can just sort of can flow from there.
I will jump in. Oh, go ahead, Michelle. No, was that you?
Yes, thank you, Sarita. I was just going to say that I think we are very much at the forefront of talking about the intersection of financial health and climate change. I attended a Aspen Institute conference on climate 2 years ago, and we had a small roundtable convening talking about just this topic. And as we went around the room, I was literally the only representative who at that time was simultaneously working on both. We had people in the finance world who were interested. We had people in the climate world who were interested, but we were the only ones actually working on both. I'm thrilled to see how that has expanded and grown and gotten traction. And I'm sure there were others with us at that time whom I just wasn't aware of, right? But we have started knitting ourselves together and becoming more aware. And so I think some of the innovation is around how do we truly embed this at the forefront? How do we instill this in part of our regular work to harden our communities against disaster? And how do we make this part of, as Sarita and Casey have so eloquently talked about, decreasing that financial wealth gap and helping to shore that up? I mean, some of the work that we've seen, it can seem daunting to work on this. And it can seem daunting to try to get policy that impacts many. It can also seem daunting to work with individuals and doing that at scale. We're working with hundreds of thousands of people a year on their financial well-being. A segment of that are the people we're serving through Porchlight. And what we're able to see is of the people we're working with on disaster, some 70% of those are from low to moderate income households. Over half are from minority communities. And their post-disaster financial outcomes are significantly better than U.S. citizens at large who go through a disaster. We're seeing a 30-point increase in credit score increase for our clients as compared to everyone in the U.S. who experiences an average 25-point drop after a disaster. And that includes the well-insured, the moneyed, right? So knowing that we can make those differences and proving it in case studies like what we have working here, showing that we can, increase people's ability to access safe and affordable housing. Those things are really meaningful. And I think turning those lessons and that work into policy, into embedded procedures that are, and of course, this is part of how we respond and prepare, as opposed to a nice to have, or we'll see, or I think somebody probably is taking care of that out there as a bolt-on addition. I think that's where we could continue to see some real innovation.
I'll just jump in. I think I think innovation is critical. And I also think that it is critical that we don't pursue the path of innovation to the degree where we don't recognize that these same systems are the problem, right? It's these same systems. So we have had many strategies towards dismantling or improving systems that broaden racial wealth gaps, that are exclusionary, that don't foster economic, that actually oppress economic opportunity. And we haven't made the progress that we need to make on those. So I am a proponent of innovation to the extent that it doesn't keep us from trotting and hammering at a same issue. And maybe we need to get at it different ways, but some of the ways that we have addressed getting at these issues could be impactful, but we have the opposition to change that has to occur. So I think in the context of political will and actually making movement on changing, moving the barriers to economic opportunity, that even, we're talking about community lenders, that community lender space. We haven't talked about the fact that many of the Black and Brown-led community lenders are left outside of this economic opportunity of climate that we're talking about as well, right? They are suffering the economic impacts, but are they prepared to move the greenhouse gas reduction fund? Do they have access to the technical knowledge, the underwriting capacity, the resources that they need to move? And those are the same issues that we've been talking about for a long time. So I am a proponent of innovation, and also wanting us to remember that many of the strategies and fights that we have been using are still germane in the context of climate, as they were in all the other, in the tech boom and a lot of other economic opportunities that haven't resulted real change for communities of color.
Yeah, and maybe just even synthesizing for the sake of time, both of the comments that Michelle and Sarita made, it is very probable that solutions exist and emerge when we're intentional about having multidisciplinary conversations. And innovation, I think, is going to be critical. But does innovation have to be from a technological perspective, or is innovation really finding the avenues to invest deeply in solutions that might already exist that we haven't thought about? We've thought very narrowly about the scalability because a lot of policy conversations will happen within silos of subject matter experts. On a very personal level, when I transitioned from working in financial health and financial literacy at the Federal Reserve into working with the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, I had colleagues that asked me what I was doing. I had cultivated this early career subject matter expertise. Didn't I want to follow that path and see where it would lead? And I think it was, yeah, but if you've ever heated your home from a stove and worried about what that was going to do to your energy bill, or wondered if you had enough gas in your tank to get to the job sites for the week, you can't help but see these challenges as inextricably linked. So I think conversations like this are really, really, really critical. for fostering innovation, but from this very multidisciplinary, locally community-centered perspective, so that we get to deep solutions that take out bigger chunks of the problem.
Wonderful. I think I mean, I could keep going. We could talk for hours on end, but I just appreciate everyone's time this morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. And just really appreciate all of the expertise and insight that the three of you brought to our conversation today. It makes me hopeful that we can build more just, more climate and resilient and more financially resilient communities. So thank you to the Center for Financial Innovation for having us this morning or today, and looking forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.